This time we are looking at Manor, Pennsylvania. Sitting out here on the railroad, this was once upon a time the main line of the Pennsylvania Railroad. It's now owned by Norfolk Southern, but it was the pioneering railroad through this part of the state. Manor sits between Penn Station, or Penn, and Irwin over here. And we move on. This shows us Manor quite a few years ago. This is 1867. This is Penn Township, where it's located. This is Penn, and here's Manor over here. And this is showing us Manor as it developed. The railroad came through there in 1852. Actually, it was building for the last couple of years before that, but 1852 is when they started to have an actual train running through there. I just wanted to show you that in 1867, when this map was made, there wasn't a lot going on. These black blobs here are the houses where people lived. Over here is a grist mill. Over here is a grist mill. There was a blacksmith shop over here and a sawmill. The Walthauers had enterprises over here. The Walthauers were the first settlers around here. They had been here since the 1700s. They were here before the railroad came, before there was anything going on. And we move on. This shows you the same place. This is Manor, known as Manor Station back then because it was a stop on the railroad. And you can see that it's developed in those 9 years. This mapping happened, it was done in 1876, the centennial year. And you can see it's increased in population since then, since the earlier map I showed you. This is here to remind us of the importance of the railroad for Manor. Because if it weren't for the railroads and the mines, there would be no Manor. And I might just make a short comment on the name, that it's called Manor. This was one of the Penn family's personal properties. William Penn had been given a charter by the King of England to have this land that we call Pennsylvania, and he was allowed by charter to take about 10% of it for himself, and he did take good chunks. There were two of those chunks in Westmoreland County, and Manor happens to show up in one of them. It was a good, amount of acreage. These guys are on the train. It was going up the Manor Valley branch. That was not the original main line of the Pennsylvania Railroad. It was a Pennsylvania Railroad operation, but it went up the valley where Bushy Run came down. It was put in the 1880s to service the mine that was being built at Claridge, and then Harrison City and Clark's Crossing, and whatever else happened along that branch. This shows the railroad station in Manor, and it was really the central feature of the town. And just down the road here, about several hundred feet, was the control tower. that controlled the interaction of railroad traffic from the main line going up and down the branch line. This view is looking more or less south, but probably more like southwest. This recalls the fact that one of the big issues was the mines. These guys were miners and mules. The mules weren't for riding. They were very useful and helpful creatures in the mines. They hauled coal. They were hitched to wagons that pulled the coal out of the mines. The mine at Manor was called a slope mine, which meant it didn't have a shaft. It went down in a slope, and coming back out, you had to have, some kind of animal power to haul it out of there. That was before they were using any kind of electrical trolleys to pull the coal cars out. This is another shot. The guys with the mules. A white mule. They weren't all black. This shows some of the guys again. Charlie Wiltrek, George Salish, Charlie Garr, and Albert Salish. And it looks like they probably weren't all happy about having their picture taken. Albert over here looks like he's just looking the other way. But the guys had their carbide lamps on. The carbide lamps were what they had for light in a mine. If you've ever been in a mine, you come to understand just how black is. I mean, a mine is intensely dark. And unless you have some kind of light, you're in trouble. The carbide lamps were, they had a flame coming out. It wasn't a wick as such. It was more like the carbide mixed with water made a kind of gas that came out of the orifice right in the middle of the reflector. And it could produce a good bit of light. When I was a kid, I one time had a carbide lamp. But they were also dangerous because if you got into mine gas, it could ignite it. These were some of the houses built by Westmoreland Coal. They were company houses. The coal companies used to like to do it this way because they could control the miners better. If the miners went on strike, they'd simply throw them out of their house. They'd have to rent their houses. This is the Walthour farm. This is the barn. This was the Walthour's mill here. This was the blacksmith shop. As I told you, the Walthours were there before Manor was ever thought of. They were some of the first inhabitants. Just about 3 miles south of this was a place called Fort Walthour, which was more or less a blockhouse where all of the local people could come when there were Indian incursions to protect themselves. The Walthours were there back in the 1700s. And this shows us the early 1900s in Manor. It looks like just a jumble of houses, but when you look, you see the railroad is coming through town, more or less from east to west. Right in the middle of town, right here, this was the railroad station. And right over here, a couple hundred feet down the tracks going east, this was the control tower. This governed the interaction of traffic. You could control switches on the railroad from here to allow trains to go different directions, whether up the valley or to stay on the main line. Down here in the corner is it's a lumber mill. It was run by steam. That's why you see the steam, the smoke coming out. And I think we'll say that's enough for number one. And we will have another one.